AEW has existed for just over 5 years now, and it's safe to say it's been a roller coaster of a 5 years for AEW, and in those 5 years we've seen many wrestlers cross over from WWE to AEW, and only a select few who have done the reverse and gone from AEW to WWE. But of this select few, there are a couple of wrestlers who I think AEW really should have done a better job at trying to retain, so let's talk about it. Let's talk about AEW's biggest fumble so far, not including Cody, Punk, or Andrade, because I've talked about them to death already. And yes, I will be doing a WWE version of this video very soon. Let's go. Before joining WWE and establishing herself in NXT, Blair Davenport had a short run in AEW, where unfortunately she didn't really do much in the end. Before WWE, Blair Davenport was known as Bea Priestley, and she started off on the New Zealand and British wrestling scene. I was a fan of Bea Priestley from her early work, particularly in What Culture Pro Wrestling, which was my first introduction to her, and it wouldn't be too long after this that she would make her debut for Stardom, the all-women's promotion in Japan, and it was here that she really started to build her name. She'd keep working in Japan and the UK simultaneously, winning the WCPW and World of Sport women's titles along the way. Then in February 2019, it was announced she had been signed to the newly formed All Elite Wrestling, and she would be making her debut for the promotion on the July Fight for the Fallen pay-per-view. And then in May of that year, she would also win the World of Stardom title, so things were really looking up for Bea Priestley, and her first match in AEW was a tag match with herself and Shoko Nakajima against Britt Baker and Riho at the aforementioned Fight for the Fallen pay-per-view. A match where her team got the win and she concussed Britt Baker, which started a feud between herself and Britt Baker, the first ever AEW women's feud. They'd meet again in the Women's Battle Royal at All Out, and then in a one-on-one match at the Full Gear pre-show, where Britt Baker won and ended the feud. And following this, her AEW appearances would be a lot more occasional, as at this time she was still working for Stardom and also living in Japan. She'd only wrestled 2 more matches for AEW in 2019, and her first AEW match and appearance of 2020 wouldn't be until March. It was a match with herself and the women's champion Nyla Rose, defeating Hikaru Shida and Chris Statlander, and after the match, she attacked Nyla Rose and posed with the AEW Women's World Title belt, establishing herself as potentially the next challenger for the title. However, this would actually end up being Bea Priestley's final ever AEW appearance, as the pandemic restricted travel, meaning Bea Priestley couldn't make it to the AEW tapings, and on August 13th, 2020, she was released from her AEW contract due to this, having not appeared on TV in months. A true shame, as nowadays she's in the WWE in NXT as Blair Davenport and has been doing very well for herself, and she could have been an asset for the AEW women's division. And not to mention, she also has history with some of the AEW women's wrestlers, of course, such as Britt Baker with their early AEW feud, or Jamie Hayter, who she was tag partners with in Stardom. That's stuff they could have built on in AEW, but now they can't. Personally, I don't think they should have released Blair Davenport and should have stuck it out and waited for travel to reopen like they did for other talents who also had travel restrictions. AEW never signed Dragon Lee in any full-time capacity, so you might question why he's on this list, but he's on this list because they should have signed him. Dragon Lee had a surprise match on the Ring of Honor Death Before Dishonor 2022 pay-per-view in a match against his real brother and AEW wrestler Roosh that came out of nowhere, and fans were very excited to see what was to come with Dragon Lee, as he had history with many of the AEW roster, and the possibility of LFI, the stable that Roosh and Dragon Lee were both part of, coming to AEW TV was now a big possibility. And sure enough, LFI would make it to AEW TV in the form of Andrade El Idolo, Roosh, and of course, Dragon Lee. Dragon Lee would make his AEW debut on the August 17th, 2022 in the first round of the AEW Trios title tournament against the Elite, where unfortunately himself and LFI lost the match. Following the match, Roosh attacked Dragon Lee and unmasked him, thus kicking him out of LFI just like that. But then it was revealed shortly after this that this would be Dragon Lee's final AEW appearance, as AEW weren't interested in signing him. And sure enough, at the end of the year, Dragon Lee announced that he had been signed to the WWE in a very interesting and unexpected move from the WWE, but it's a move that has very much paid off for the WWE, as Dragon Lee came into NXT and immediately started lighting it up. He had numerous title shots early on in his NXT career, all unsuccessful at first, but then at NXT Deadline, just less than a year after it was announced he had signed, he won his first WWE title as he defeated Dominic Mysterio for the NXT North American Championship. His title reign lasted less than a month, but it looks like he's main roster bound very soon, as he's already made a couple of SmackDown appearances and has a main roster contract. I think passing on Dragon Lee was a mistake from AEW, as he perfectly suits the AEW style and the AEW product, and like I said before, he has history with numerous members of the AEW roster. Passing on Dragon Lee at the time didn't feel like a big loss for AEW, but since he's been in WWE and hindsight is 2020, he's been smashing it, and now it feels like a bit of a fumble on AEW's part. And let's go ahead and talk about Jade Cargill, who of course recently made her WWE debut officially as part of the Women's Royal Rumble match. Jade Cargill had a fairly successful run in AEW, which made it very shocking and surprising when it was announced that she would be leaving AEW to sign for the WWE. Jade Cargill was first introduced on the November 11th, 2020 episode of AEW Dynamite, where she interrupted a Cody Rhodes promo to tease the arrival of Shaq. It was a confusing segment and nobody knew who Jade Cargill was, other than that she had been training under the Nightmare Factory, but they would get to know who she was when that match involving Shaq would take place 3 months later, as she teamed with Shaq to defeat Cody Rhodes and Red Velvet on her debut in a surprisingly awesome and fun match. And then from there, her dominant run in AEW would kick off, as week in week out across Dynamite, Rampage and Dark, she would just destroy other wrestlers and squash them. This all led to the end of 2021, where AEW announced the TBS title and a tournament to crown the first champion, which Jade Cargill of course entered and went all the way, defeating Ruby Soho in the finals on the first Dynamite of 2022 to become the inaugural AEW TBS champion. And then from here, she would have a reign of complete domination, beating anyone who challenged her and holding the title for nearly a year and a half. She fought off the likes of Ty Conti, Anna Jay, Willow Nightingale, Athena, Nyla Rose, Sky Blue, Billy Starks, Taya Valkyrie and many more to hold the TBS title, before a surprise return of Chris Statlander beat her for the title at Double or Nothing 2023. And shortly after that happened, it was reported that Jade Cargill would be off TV for a bit, and then during that time off, it was when it came out that she was likely leaving AEW to head to the WWE, as she wasn't renewing her contract. She'd have her last match on the September 15th Dynamite, putting Chris Statlander over, and she left AEW to join the WWE, as we all know. And I have to say, I think this is a fumble on AEW's part, purely because Jade Cargill was a homegrown AEW talent. She had her first ever wrestling match in AEW, which, with the exception of Hook, I can't think of anyone else who did that. And I think that's a big thing for AEW to have, is to have homegrown stars like that, who are at the top of the company and are there for years to come, and they don't want to be a stepping stone promotion, which is a problem that Impact has kind of run into the last few years, where they're always constantly losing their top big names to the bigger companies. And I don't think it's a good thing for AEW to have that, and Jade Cargill definitely made it seem that way by leaving AEW after she had been their first ever TBS champion for a year and a half, which is another thing. Imagine that she was your champion for a year and a half and you didn't keep her. It all feels like a bit of a waste and a bit for nothing, because during Jade Cargill's TBS title reign, she didn't really wrestle any of the big AEW women's division names other than like Athena, you know, such as the likes of Britt Baker, Thunder Rosa, Jamie Hayter. She never worked with them or had a match with any of them. And so it all feels like a bit of a waste, because she was the champion for a year and a half and now she's gone. Regardless, it's a great signing for WWE, and though I do think it's a fumble from AEW and makes them look like a bit of a stepping stone, I think they can recover, especially with Mercedes Moné coming in and the AEW women's division starting to get more focus. I think it's not that too bad of a loss for them, but it's a very good gain from WWE. Thanks for watching this video, guys. Be sure to like it and subscribe if you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye and keep on rolling.